Hello, this is Nadia Dervish, and this is my final presentation. All right. At the beginning of the course, I marked that I strongly agreed with the statement that the most important predictor of success in second language acquisition is motivation. My feelings have not really changed throughout the course, and though there are multiple factors at play when learning a new language, I now have textual support for why I agree with this statement, whereas in the beginning it was more of an idealized notion that I had. Though in some ways it still kind of is. If I could make one quick caveat, it would be that I'm looking at this statement with its relationship to adult learners in particular. The research clearly shows that children are like sponges, and the case could be made that children, so long as they are in the right place at the right time, can't help but learn. I also realize this sounds a bit like the Aeneas perspective, but chapter 1 shows how children are almost always successful in acquiring languages spoken to them during childhood. One thing that really helped reaffirm my opinion was learning about all of the different approaches to language acquisition, from the grammar translation method to audiolingual approach. Through all of the different methods and approaches and teaching proposals and techniques that we've learned about, there's always been one thing that has been consistent. There has always been, and there always will be, students that are successful, and unfortunately, students that aren't. And I think the idea of motivation being a key factor speaks to why this is. Why with so many different theories and styles and approaches and learner profiles, there are those who can and those who simply cannot. Of course, nothing is quite that black and white, so let's unpack the statement itself a little bit. Something to consider is the tricky nature of motivation. The book looks at motivation as the desire to interact and opportunities found, or the need to interact. So language learning doesn't take place in a vacuum. So is it the more motivated students who are using their language skills more often, or does their context simply breed the necessity to interact? Lightbrown and Spada identified two factors in regards to motivation: the learner's communicative needs, and then their attitudes towards the second language community. So say you have a student who's practicing their speaking all of the time. Are they more motivated than the other student? Not necessarily, just maybe the need is there, and that spurs their motivation. It's a complex issue when we look at motivation, but the book also defines two different types of motivation: instrumental and integrative motivation. Instrumental motivation is language learning for immediate or practical goals. So it's like the student mentioned earlier who practices speaking all of the time simply because they have to. The need is there, the immediate need is there. Whereas we have integrative motivation, and that is language learning for personal growth and cultural enrichment through contact with speakers of other languages. More of the second factor of motivation mentioned by Lightbrown and Spada, that attitude towards the language learning community. And while there hasn't been much research done on how pedagogical practices interact with motivation, one study that scratched the surface of this topic looked at motivation and pedagogical practices, but motivation was measured by student participation in the classroom. So we will touch on this in greater detail in a following slide. However, when measuring motivation this way, there are things that teachers can do to make a positive contribution on students' motivation to learn. So chapter 3 takes a more in-depth look at those individual differences in second language learners. We have an outgoing personality, motivation, age, intelligence. These are all things that we've tried to observe and research, but as the text states, it's not possible to directly observe things like motivation, extroversion, or even intelligence. It's hard to measure these things. So we can't really interpret correlation between these factors and language learning outcomes. However, with age, it's a little bit different. As the text states, both experience and research show that starting early is not a guarantee of success, and that older learners can attain high levels of proficiency, but pre-puberty learners acquiring language in a natural environment do have an advantage. In regards to personality, it's inhibition that is the key factor here. Is an outgoing personality less anxious? Do they feel less inhibition? And it's this inhibition that can be a negative force when trying to speak a foreign language. Lastly, we have intelligence. Are intelligent people better at learning languages? Well, according to a study conducted in a French immersion program in Canada, though a higher IQ was correlated with developing reading and grammar and vocabulary skills, it was unrelated to oral production skills. Which leads me to my next question. Well, what makes a successful learner, right? One who knows all the rules or one who can speak? This kind of leads me to my final point when looking at the statement, the most important predictor of success in second language acquisition is motivation. The key words are motivation and success. We've already looked at the tricky nature of motivation, but how you define success can make or break this statement. If success is native-like fluency, well, the research shows that anyone learning a language after puberty is unlikely to ever reach this goal. Therefore, having realistic goals and expectations is important. The real goal should be multi-competence. We need to abandon the notion that speaking like a native is the main marker of success. So what does this mean for educators? What are some practical things that we can do with this knowledge? First thing is to help students set realistic goals, to take out that idea that sounding like a native is the end all and the be all. Secondly, we can help teach self-regulation strategies to help learners develop autonomy and encourage them to take their learning into their own hands. Touching back on motivation for our third point, we can help students identify both instrumental and integrative motivation. It's great to have the students that study hard and do well on a test, but help learners find something in the language or the culture itself to fall in love with, to help spark that integrative motivation. Also, make the classroom a supportive environment. Use engaging and relevant activities. All of these tips can help create an atmosphere for success and help to motivate students persevere in their language learning journey.